When we moved into the old farmhouse on Maple Hill Road, I thought it would be a fresh start. Just me and my daughter, Emily. It wasn't anything fancy. The roof creaked with every gust of wind, and the floors groaned underfoot like the house itself was sighing with age. But it was ours. After everything we'd been through, that was enough. Emily, ever the curious 5-year-old, had taken to exploring every corner the first day we arrived. I was still unpacking boxes in the kitchen when I heard her calling out from above, "Mommy, there's treasure in the attic." The attic. I hadn't even thought to look there yet. When I reached the top of the pull-down ladder, Emily was already sitting cross-legged in a pool of dust, her small hands cradling something. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through a narrow window, I saw what had caught her attention. A porcelain doll. It lay nestled in the folds of an old, moth-eaten blanket. The doll wore a frayed lace dress, yellowed with time. Its curls, once golden, were now dull and matted. One glass eye stared blankly ahead, while the other had a jagged crack running through it. But what unsettled me most was its smile. Too wide, too perfect, almost smug. Still, Emily was enchanted. "Her name is Rose," she announced without hesitation. She was waiting for me. I hesitated. There was a strange heaviness in the air up there, like the attic was holding its breath. But I didn't want to spoil her joy, so I smiled. "She's beautiful," I lied, brushing dust from the doll's dress. That night, I watched Emily twirl through the living room, the doll clutched tightly in her arms. She didn't want to eat without Rose sitting beside her. She tucked her into a tiny blanket when it was time for bed. I chalked it up to the vivid imagination of a child. We'd had a hard year. Maybe this doll was her way of coping, of grounding herself in a strange new home. The tea parties began the next morning. From the hallway, I'd hear Emily's little voice floating from her room in animated conversation. She'd pour imaginary tea and giggle at jokes only she and the doll could understand. I stood at her door more than once, peeking in, smiling at the innocence of it all. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was late afternoon. I was passing by her room when I paused again to listen. Emily's voice was high and bright, the way it always was when she played pretend. But then, beneath it, I heard something else. Another voice. It was faint, breathy, almost sing-song. A soft, girlish reply that echoed in the room like a breeze whispering through broken glass. I froze. Maybe it was the wind through the eaves, maybe a trick of my mind, but every instinct screamed otherwise. I pushed the door open fast. Emily turned, startled. "You scared her, Mommy," she said with a pout, clutching the doll to her chest. "She says she doesn't like you here." For a long moment I couldn't speak. My gaze locked on the doll, its cracked eye, its painted lips stretched in that eternal grin. Then I forced a smile, told Emily to wash up for dinner, and walked out of the room, my skin crawling. That night, as the house settled around us, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I told myself it was nothing. Kids say strange things. Dolls are just porcelain and cloth. But deep down, something cold was starting to stir in my gut. Something that told me this wasn't just a doll. And whatever it was, it had just begun. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the stress of moving had finally caught up to me, and my mind was playing tricks. I went to bed that night telling myself that what I heard, what I thought I heard, was just Emily imitating a second voice. Children do that all the time, right? But that night, I barely slept. I kept replaying it in my head. That reply. Faint. Childlike. Not my daughter. The memory clung to me like damp air. By morning, my nerves were raw, but I pushed forward. There was no room for fear. I had to be the adult. Emily needed me steady. Still, I couldn't stop watching her. At breakfast, she fed Rose cereal from a spoon. "She doesn't like toast," Emily said, speaking for the doll. Her voice was cheerful, but her eyes were distant, focused on Rose as if waiting for her to respond. I told myself this was normal, a child and her toy. I even smiled at her playfulness, trying to be encouraging, but the smile didn't reach my chest. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the hallway when I heard it again. 2 voices. Not just Emily chattering, but a reply. Clearer this time. "Why don't you like her?" Emily asked. "She's mean," the second voice answered, faint but unmistakable. I dropped the basket, heart pounding. I ran to her door and threw it open. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor with her tea set in front of her and Rose in the center seat. She looked up, her brows drawn low, irritated. "You scared her, Mommy," she said, hugging the doll tightly. Her little voice had an edge to it. "She says she doesn't like you here." My mouth opened, but no words came. I stared at the doll, its cracked eye catching the light, the other wide and perfect, unblinking. The smile on its face seemed deeper somehow, stretched. I closed the door without saying a word and leaned against the wall outside, trembling. That night, things escalated. I woke to a creak above my bed, slow, deliberate, like someone stepping across wooden boards. The attic. I sat up, listening, straining to make out another sound, another creak, and then nothing. I went to Emily's room. She lay curled up, Rose cradled in her arms like a favorite teddy bear. Her breath was slow and even. I stood there for a long moment, frozen by indecision. The noise could have been anything, the house settling, the wind. But my heart said otherwise, and my heart was racing. Grabbing the flashlight from the hallway drawer, I pulled down the attic ladder, every clunk of the unfolding wood echoing in the silent house. I climbed slowly, each step groaning beneath me. The attic was colder than I remembered. My breath came in shallow puffs as I swept the flashlight across the room. Dust floated like ash in the beam. Boxes, old furniture, a stack of yellowed newspapers, nothing out of place. I let out a shaky breath, beginning to lower the flashlight, and the beam flickered. Total darkness swallowed me for a split second. In that instant, I heard it, a rustle in the far corner, and then a giggle. Software, right beside my ear. I dropped the flashlight. Its clatter broke the silence, the beam skittering across the attic floor like a living thing. I didn't wait. I bolted down the ladder, not bothering to pull it back up, and slammed the hatch shut with all my strength. I stood in the hallway for a long time, my back against the wall, hands trembling. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't just Emily playing pretend. Something was in this house. Something that wasn't supposed to be. I couldn't shake the feeling. After that night, after the second voice, I found myself watching shadows more than sunlight, listening more than speaking, and always keeping one ear trained on Emily's room. Something had changed in her. The innocent tea parties with Rose had become rituals, more intense, more secretive. I'd pass by and hear her whispering, laughing in that eerie, too quiet way. And when I opened the door, she'd stop abruptly and glare at me, not with childish annoyance, but something colder, like I was interrupting something sacred. I tried to talk to her, asked if everything was okay, if maybe she wanted to play with something else, go outside, watch a movie together. She never answered directly, just held Rose tighter and said, "We're busy." The more I tried to create space between her and that doll, the worse it got. One evening, I gently took Rose while Emily was brushing her teeth, saying I'd set her down on the nightstand. The instant the doll left her hands, she screamed. A piercing, guttural sound I didn't know a 5-year-old could make. "She doesn't want to be away from me," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "You're hurting her." I backed away, heart pounding, and placed the doll back in her arms. Emily clutched it like a lifeline and sobbed into its matted curls. I stood frozen in the doorway, helpless, chilled by something I couldn't name. The next day, the house felt different, heavier. The air had a thickness to it, like the walls themselves were pressing in. Doors creaked open without wind. The floorboards groaned even when no one was walking. I kept catching movement in the corners of my vision, fluttering shadows, quick and low. And at night, always at night, I heard it. The attic. It started as soft creaking above my bed, then whispers, then laughter, light and girlish, echoing faintly through the ceiling like it traveled through old wood and memories. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct screamed to leave it be. But I had to know. For Emily. For both of us. So I waited until she was asleep, Rose nestled under her chin. Then I grabbed the flashlight. The ladder groaned as I pulled it down, each hinge protesting with a metallic shriek. I climbed slowly, the steps groaning louder the higher I went. When I reached the top, the attic seemed darker than I remembered. I clicked on the flashlight. A narrow beam cut through the gloom. Everything looked the same. The sagging rafters, cobwebs stretched like veins across the ceiling, old trunks and forgotten furniture draped in dusty sheets. My breath clouded the air, too cold for spring. I stepped forward, scanning the space. Nothing moved. I lowered the flashlight, exhaling slowly, trying to quiet my pulse. And then, it flickered. The beam blinked out for half a second. Pitch blackness swallowed the attic. In that instant, just before the light returned, I heard it, a rustling in the far corner. Then, a giggle, software, close, right beside my ear. I turned, flashlight trembling in my grip, darting across the attic with no target. The air was suddenly oppressive, thick with dust and something else, something old and angry. I backed toward the ladder, heart hammering in my chest. The laughter didn't follow, but I felt it behind me, watching. I climbed down faster than I should have, nearly slipped on the last rung. I pulled the ladder up and slammed the hatch shut so hard the hallway shook. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. My palms were damp, my body ice cold. I couldn't keep pretending. There was something in this house, in that attic, and I was starting to believe it came with the doll. The next morning, Emily was quiet. Too quiet. She sat at the table, feeding Rose invisible bites of cereal again, humming some tune I didn't recognize. When I asked her where she learned it, she didn't look up. "She taught it to me," she said. I didn't ask who she was. I already knew. I tried to pull Emily away. I tried everything. TV, her favorite picture books, the swing set in the backyard, but nothing held her attention the way Rose did. And not in the usual, "this is my new favorite toy" way. It was possessive, obsessive, as though letting go of the doll would be like losing a limb. She wouldn't eat without Rose, wouldn't sleep without her, wouldn't speak to me unless I spoke to Rose first. She was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to get her back. One afternoon, I picked up Rose while Emily was distracted in the kitchen. I just wanted to move her, put her on a shelf, something small. But the moment Emily noticed, she shrieked like she was being torn apart. "No!" she screamed, her little face red with fury. "You don't touch her! She's mine!" I froze, stunned by the sheer force behind her voice. Her eyes, those big, innocent eyes, looked hollow for a moment, like something else was staring out of them. I set the doll down immediately, and Emily collapsed onto her knees, cradling it like it had been wounded. She sobbed into its cracked porcelain face, whispering apologies I didn't understand. That night, something new happened. It was nearly midnight. I was up again, pacing the hallway, half out of my mind with worry. I walked past Emily's room and paused. Her laughter was echoing faintly behind the door, sharp, wild, broken up by frantic giggles and hushed words. I slowly opened the door. Emily sat in the middle of her bed, the sheets twisted beneath her knees, Rose propped against a pillow. The tea set was out again. She poured invisible tea into one of the chipped cups, but her head kept twitching to the side like someone was whispering in her ear. She didn't even see me. "Emily," I said gently. She turned, abruptly, like a puppet on strings, and stared. "You're not invited," she said flatly, and turned back to the doll. The next morning, I noticed the footprints, tiny ones, smaller than Emily's. They started at the base of the attic stairs and trailed all the way to her bed. Little muddy ovals, each one distinct, each one leading only downward, as if something had come from the attic, but not gone back. I dropped to my knees and examined them. They were damp, fresh, and far too small to belong to either of us. I scrubbed them clean, hoping Emily wouldn't see. But the moment I tossed the rag into the sink, she walked in, clutching Rose to her chest, and said, "She was just cold. She came down to find me." I couldn't hide my fear fast enough. That evening, I sat in bed trying to make sense of it all. The voices, the attic, the footprints, Emily's strange behavior. Every fiber of me screamed to run, to take my daughter and leave this place behind. But how do you run from something that follows you everywhere? Something that climbs out of the walls and lives in your child's arms? I kept seeing the footprints in my mind. How they didn't return to the attic. How they stopped right at Emily's bedside. Something was feeding on her. On both of us. It wasn't just play anymore. It was attachment. And the longer I waited, the deeper its hold became. I didn't know what Rose really was. A spirit? A curse? A parasite? But she wasn't just porcelain and fabric. She was alive. And she wanted my daughter all to herself. I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers, the cold spots, the way Emily stared at me as if I were the stranger in my own home. It was all unraveling too fast. I was losing her. And I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever Rose was, she wasn't just a doll. She was a presence, a parasite, and she was feeding off my daughter. Emily hadn't smiled in days. Not a real smile. Her face was pale, shadowed beneath the eyes. She barely ate. She spoke only to Rose, her voice hushed, reverent, like she was obeying something no one else could hear. I waited for the moment. When she finally napped, curled tight in a ball with Rose tucked under her chin, I stood at the foot of her bed and watched for a long time. My hands trembled, my heart ached, but I knew what I had to do. I slipped Rose from her arms as gently as I could, holding my breath as Emily stirred and murmured. But she didn't wake. Clutching the doll tightly, I walked out to the backyard. The sun was dipping below the trees, casting long, twisted shadows across the grass. I grabbed the shovel from the shed and found a spot near the edge of the fence where the earth was soft. I dug. With every scoop, I felt the weight of something pressing down on me. Not just guilt, but something heavier. A pressure in my chest, in my ears, like the world around me didn't want this to happen. The wind picked up. The trees rustled violently. Then I heard it. A whisper. Not in my head, not a memory. A real, clear whisper, floating through the air behind me. "Don't." I froze. The doll was still in my arms, face down, hair dangling like dried seaweed. I turned her over slowly, and for a moment, I swore her eyes had moved. That cracked glass gaze. It wasn't looking forward anymore. It was looking at me. "Stop it." The voice came again, smaller this time. A child's voice. Cold and sad and furious. I forced myself to keep digging. The hole was shallow, but deep enough for the doll. I placed Rose inside, her face turned away. Her smile, that damned eternal grin, still visible through the dirt-smudged lace. I began covering her. The whispering rose into a chorus. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, just out of reach. Crying, pleading, chanting. The air grew colder. I could see my breath in the spring dusk. But I didn't stop until she was gone. When the final handful of dirt covered her face, the voices fell silent. The wind ceased. The world stood still. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. When I came back inside, Emily was sitting up in bed, crying. Her eyes were wild with panic. "She's cold," she wailed. "She says it's dark down there. She's scared." I rushed to her side, pulled her into my arms, whispered that everything was okay now, that it was over. But she wouldn't calm down. "She wants to come back," Emily sobbed. "She's alone." I stayed with her all night, stroking her hair, whispering lullabies until she finally drifted into a fitful sleep. I didn't sleep at all. Part of me hoped I'd wake the next day to find my child restored, free of whatever had clung to her for the past few weeks. But I was wrong. Because when I finally dragged myself into my bedroom just before dawn, I pulled back the covers and let out a strangled cry. There, lying on my pillow, was Rose. Dirt-caked, dress tattered, cracked eye glinting in the dim morning light. And that same painted smile, wider than ever. I didn't scream right away. I couldn't. I stood there at the edge of my bed, staring at that dirt-smeared porcelain face, frozen. My mind refused to believe what my eyes were showing me. But there she was, Rose, lying neatly on my pillow as if she had never been buried. Her cracked eye glinted in the faint glow of the hallway light. Her smile, it was wider now. I swear it was. My breath hitched. I backed away, my legs weak and trembling. I wanted to run, to shake myself awake, to make it all vanish in a blink. But this wasn't a dream. I didn't touch her. I didn't even go near her. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, stuffed it into my pocket, and left the room without looking back. I slept on the couch that night, or tried to. The next morning, she was gone. Not under the pillow. Not in the sheets. Just gone. But when I opened the kitchen drawer to get a spoon, she was there, in the drawer, curled up like she'd been waiting, her hair trailing over the silverware. I screamed so loud I scared Emily. She came running, rubbing her eyes. "Why are you yelling?" she asked, looking from me to the drawer. When she saw Rose, her expression didn't change. Not shock, not surprise, only relief. "She came back," Emily whispered, a small smile creeping onto her lips. "She said she missed me." I slammed the drawer shut and locked myself in the bathroom, dry heaving over the sink. The doll wouldn't stay gone. I tried again, 3 more times. First, I drove 10 miles out of town and dropped her in a dumpster behind an abandoned gas station. I watched the lid close with a metallic clunk and drove home in silence. That night, she was sitting in the bathtub, arms folded neatly in her lap, staring at the drain. The next day, I tied her up in a pillowcase and stuffed her into the wood stove out back. I lit the fire with trembling hands. But the flames, they avoided her. They licked the edges of the pillowcase, turned the fabric to ash. But the doll remained untouched, not even singed. And when I turned to run, she was standing on the edge of the stove door, as if she had climbed out. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. In my dreams, she buried me. I'd wake up choking, dirt filling my mouth, clawing at soil that wasn't there. And always, I'd hear her voice, soft and sing-song, just behind me. "Sleep, Mommy. We like you better quiet." My body was breaking down. My hands shook. My eyes burned. My thoughts were splintering, unraveling faster than I could gather them. Emily, meanwhile, seemed stronger, more alert, more talkative, but only to Rose. She began speaking in 2 voices, one light and girlish, the other colder, quieter, like a whisper echoing inside a well. She started calling me Grace instead of Mommy. I begged her to stop. "You don't like my name?" she asked with a tilt of her head. "No," I choked out. "You're my daughter. You call me Mommy." She smiled. That same wide smile. "She says you're not my mommy anymore." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I started seeing her, Rose, in places I'd already checked, inside locked closets, under the sink. Once she was on the passenger seat of my car before I even opened the door. And worst of all, one morning she was curled up beside me in bed, arms slung across my chest like a child napping with their mother. I lost time. Minutes, then hours. One evening I looked at the clock and realized I'd been sitting in the same spot for almost 5 hours, unable to remember what I'd done. Emily would speak to me, but her voice came from far away, like I was already halfway gone. I knew I had to find answers, because now it wasn't just my daughter's life I was afraid for. It was my soul. It began with a name. I hadn't spoken it aloud since Emily first gave it to the doll, Rose. But now, every time I looked at her, every time she appeared where I was certain I'd never placed her, the name echoed louder. Rose. As if the house itself were whispering it, chanting it. I was unraveling. The dreams had grown worse, longer, deeper, more real. I saw Rose standing at the edge of my bed, her dress dripping with soil, her cracked eye gleaming like ice. She'd smile, then raise her tiny porcelain arms. Dirt would rise behind her like a wave, pulling me under. I'd claw at the darkness, trying to scream, but the earth filled my throat, and all I could hear was her voice, soft and close. "Stay with us, Mommy. We're so lonely." I woke gasping, clawing at my own neck, drenched in sweat. I knew then I had to find out what she was, who she had been. I began researching the house's history. Late nights in dusty town archives, pouring through yellowed papers and brittle photographs. It didn't take long to find it. Maple Hill House, 1913. A fire in the attic. A child perished. Her name was Rose Whitaker, age 6. The fire report said she had been playing in the attic, alone. By the time her mother noticed the smoke, it was too late. They found Rose's remains near a scorched doll cradle, clutching something tight to her chest. Only the porcelain survived the flames. But the tragedy didn't end there. 2 weeks later, the mother, Eliza Whitaker, vanished without a trace. Neighbors claimed they heard screaming the night before she disappeared. Some said she was losing her mind, that she believed her daughter had come back, that the doll had started whispering to her, that she tried to destroy it, but it wouldn't burn. I sat frozen in the archives building, the newspaper clipping trembling in my hand. A quote from a neighbor stood out like blood on a white wall. She said the doll wasn't just haunted, she said it owned her now. I drove home in silence. By the time I stepped into the house, it felt like something had shifted. The walls seemed narrower, the lights dimmer, and the silence. It pressed against my ears like cotton. I found Emily sitting on the floor of her room, Rose in her lap. Her eyes were blank, distant. "She says it's time," Emily whispered, still not looking at me. "Time for what?" My voice cracked. Emily tilted her head. "For you to choose." My heart stopped. That night, I dreamed again. But this time, Rose didn't smile. She stood in front of me in the attic, intact, alive. Her eyes were whole, her hair smooth, her skin glowing, untouched by time or fire. "I never left," she said, her voice like leaves in the wind. "They just stopped listening." I tried to back away, but the attic had no walls anymore, just blackness and ash and the sound of children crying in the distance. "You can go," she said, stepping closer. "But she stays." I turned and saw Emily behind me, her hand held out, her eyes empty, her lips stitched into a grin too wide for her face. "Or," Rose whispered, reaching out, "you can stay with us forever." I woke up screaming. Emily was sitting cross-legged beside the bed, still in her nightgown. Rose was in her lap. "She says you belong to her now," I snapped. I lunged at the doll, ripped it from Emily's hands, and ran to the fireplace. Emily screamed behind me, shrieking like something ancient and broken. But I didn't stop. I threw Rose into the fire, stoking the flames with every bit of fuel I could find. But she didn't burn. The flames curled around her like wind. They danced and flared, but never touched her. Her cracked eye stared back at me through the blaze, unblinking. Emily had gone silent. When I turned, she stood at the edge of the room, watching me, not with horror, but calm acceptance. "She said it wouldn't work," Emily whispered. "She says you belong here, with us." That was the last night I tried to fight it. I didn't leave. I didn't run. Because I finally understood. Rose wasn't haunting the house. She was the house. And now, so was I. If you ever find yourself on Maple Hill Road, don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you hear from the attic, never open the door.